Well, I'm a little fascinated, Brian, about how you found this story. You were actively looking for a story, something to write about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I had just finished a book on another Northwest-centric subject matter, and I was just looking for new content, and I started digging, and I stumbled across this story about the Weyerhaeuser kidnapping, and I wasn't familiar with the story myself. And I did a little digging, and the more I dug, I went, holy smokes, this is amazing.
Now, when you say digging, you were looking at actual old newspapers?
I was looking at old newspapers. I was just digging through articles online, and I found this to be the most astonishing story that I'd ever stumbled across. I mean, and that's not hyperbole. This is an amazing story. Blew my mind.
Why don't we already know this story here in the Northwest?
A lot of people do. A lot of people are familiar with it, but I just happen to be one of them that wasn't familiar with it. And those who are familiar with it, they don't understand all the details to it. There are so many layers to the story.
So this is a kidnapping, a prominent family in the Northwest, a rich family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1935. George, 9 years old, he's walking home from school, and he gets snatched right off the streets, 3 blocks from his home.
George Weyerhaeuser.
George Weyerhaeuser.
From the Weyerhaeuser Lumber Company.
Exactly. And then it became this huge case. It was on the front page of every newspaper in America. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The London Times sent a reporter over to cover it. 7% of the entire FBI staff was stationed in Seattle and Tacoma to cover this. It was a big deal when it happened. It was a really big deal.
So there's a nationwide manhunt, or at least a Northwest-wide manhunt?
Oh yeah, it became, as the New York Times described it, the greatest manhunt in Northwest history. When George is snatched off the street, the FBI comes swooping in, but the family says, nope, you're going to back off. You're not going to do anything until we make the money drop. And everything about this case was just like something out of a movie, you know, the ransom letter and how the family was supposed to communicate with the kidnappers using personal ads in the Seattle PI using a code name. And then the whole money drop at the abandoned house, and just on and on and on, and how George was kept during the kidnapping. The kidnappers kept him buried in a hole in the ground, chained up out in the forest of Issaquah, and they kept him locked in a trunk, and they kept him locked in a closet, they kept him chained to a tree, and it goes on and on and on.
Let me go back to one of those. The kidnappers and the family are communicating through newspaper want ads?
Personal ads.
Personal ads.
Yeah.
Okay, as a writer, you have their communications in print.
Yeah, exactly. If you go to the old Seattle PI, you can actually find the communications. So you flip open the personal ads and you can see it, and it'll say something to the effect of, we're ready, or we have the money, or something like that, signed Percy Minnie. And so the kidnappers, they're flipping through the paper every day looking for this, and they see it and go, okay, they're ready to make the money drop. Then they communicate again with the family, telling them where to do the money drop, and then that's a whole elaborate thing in and of itself.
You interviewed George Weyerhaeuser.
I did. I finally tracked him down, which was no small task. And he was 94 years old. In fact, when I met him, I'm like, George, how old are you? Brian, I'm 94 years old. I'm like, geez, I should look so good when I'm 94 years old. He looked amazing. And when I finished my interview with him, he said, Brian, how long is it going to take you to write this book? And I said, for everything involved, close to 2 years. Brian, I'm 94. Write fast.
Does George remember what they were like, what these guys were like, and how they treated him? And
yeah, he does. The woman, Margaret, poor Margaret, poor Margaret, what a sap. He never even saw her, and they went to great pains to make sure that she never saw him. They would have her hunched down on the front seat and put the seat over her, and she didn't know that George was being loaded into the trunk of the car. She had no clue. So she never saw him once. Harmon Whaley, who's Margaret's husband, he was the one that kind of took care of George over in Spokane. Bill Mahan, who was the mastermind of the outfit, he was the one that scared George. He was the one that he was concerned about the most. But George found Harmon Whaley to be a reasonable guy. That's what he said. He said he was a reasonable guy when he was looking after me.
Okay, so they have him. They make a money drop? They gave the kidnappers the money?
Yeah. They paid $200,000 in small unmarked bills. And so the kidnappers got the money. They went back to Spokane, where they had George stashed in a closet in this house that they'd rented from a pastor in Spokane. And then they brought George back to drop him off. They hadn't really figured out where they were going to drop him off. And so they dropped him in the forest in Issaquah, near where they had him buried in the ground. They gave him $1 and a blanket and said, "Your dad's going to come pick you up." And the kidnappers left. Well, the dad's not coming because the dad doesn't know that George has been dropped off, and he has no idea where. So George is sitting out there in the rain, in pitch dark, with a blanket and a $1 bill in the forest of Issaquah. And he waits for a couple hours and finally said, "This is ridiculous. I've had enough." And he starts walking. He walks for miles.
How old is this kid again?
9 years old.
He's out there. The whole world is looking for this kid. And then this is where it gets creepy, right?
Right. So he starts walking, and he walks for miles, and he gets to this farmer's house. Knocks on the door. Farmer answers the door, and he goes, "Hi, I'm George Weyerhaeuser. Can you take me to my house?" So this farmer opens the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the kid who's been on the front page of every newspaper in America magically appears on his doorstep. Okay? And he's like, "Oh my gosh, yes." Takes George, throws him in their Model T, and starts driving back to Tacoma. They get about as far as Renton, and the farmer calls the Weyerhaeuser house, because evidently you can just grab the phone book and, call famous rich people anytime you want. So he calls, and the FBI's got a phone system set up at the Weyerhaeuser house just for this call. Fails completely, utterly fails. Call doesn't go through. And so the farmer calls the police. Now, here's where it becomes who do you believe, the reporter or do you believe the FBI? Okay? The reporter, you have to understand, media circus at the Weyerhaeuser house. They're camped out there waiting for the big break. Police are all over the place. People are stealing flowers from the yard as souvenirs. The reporter gets a tip, allegedly, from his publisher saying the Weyerhaeuser kid's been found. He is currently in Renton, and he's coming this way in a Model T. Okay? Now, the FBI says that the reporter was at the police station, overheard the phone call between the reporter and the police, and went and got a cab and said, "Hey, I found out that the kid is coming up from Renton. Let's go intercept him." So the reporter gets a cabbie. They start driving south. Sure enough, here comes the Model T coming the opposite direction. Peel around, get the car, force the car over, okay? And then they run over to the car and say, "George, we're here to save you. We're here to save you." They imply that they're with the police, give the farmer $5. Farmer hands the kid over to the reporter, no questions asked. Then the reporter takes George, puts him in the cab back seat, sits on the floorboards as they drive back to Tacoma, and he interviews George in the back seat to get the
scoop of a lifetime.
Scoop of a lifetime. It was a Pulitzer Prize nominated article, that interview.
Oh my goodness, this is bizarre. It's a bizarre story.
There's so many bizarre layers to this thing. Here's one of my favorites. Maybe this has something to do with the fact that it's the Depression, and everybody wants to feel like they can help out in some way, shape, or form. So people would write letters to the FBI offering suggestions on how to capture the kidnappers. And like one of them was, the kidnappers are obviously going to be driving very fast because they want to escape. Driving fast is against the law, so the police should be within their rights to shoot the tires out of any car speeding in the state of Washington. Okay? My favorite, though, is the guy said, "Okay, here's the thing. The money is going to have to be transferred to the kidnappers in a suitcase. Okay? Rig it up so when they open it up, it sprays their face with acid. Or, better yet, you put in a secret compartment so when they open it up, out jumps a cobra."
was a different time, right? It was a different time. So you wrote this book.
Yeah.
I mean, you took 2 years out of your life and you wrote this book. How fulfilling has it been to get this story out into the world?
It is the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done in my life. It really is, because it's an amazing story, and the more you read about it, the more amazing it becomes. And the fact that most people aren't aware of how amazing it is, and that I got, the opportunity to share this amazing story, it's the best feeling in the world.
And there's we're going to do a little tease here. There's something that happens towards the end that is fantastic.
Yeah, it completely restores your faith in humanity. It's a great ending. It's such a great ending.
We could all use a little bit of that right now, right?
Darn right.
Tell me this: the Weyerhaeuser family now. Mm-hmm. So George is now 96. How have they received this book?
It's been interesting. George never talked about the kidnapping growing up. He never talked about it with his kids, very much at least. And so a lot of it is new information for them. But from what I've heard from at least one of the daughters, she's enjoyed the book. And George seems to have enjoyed it as well, from what I hear, which is really good news. I was really nervous about that. Because I knew for a fact that some of the information was going to be wrong. I know that for a fact, because you have no idea how much wrong information is online about this story, or in the newspapers. Because the newspapers, there's so many articles. I went through 2,500 pages of FBI documents and over 200 newspaper articles and court documents and interviewing George. All the information doesn't line up, okay? So I had to do my best of kind of extrapolating what I think is probably the most accurate based on the accumulation of all the information.
Crazy. Mm-hmm. And now it almost feels like this piece of Northwest history in a way has been restored, right?
It is.
Because of your book.
I think, in my opinion, it's the most fascinating crime in Washington state history. Some people would say, there's the Wami murders and there's D.B. Cooper and stuff like that. But there's so many more layers to this than any other story that I've stumbled across. There's just so many cool little bits of information that I would run upstairs to my wife on a nightly basis going, you cannot believe what I just learned about this story. Little stuff, just tiny little things. Here's another example of that. So after George gets brought back home, he has to do the dog and pony show for the media, all right? So he's in front of all the media and waving at everybody, and they're just falling all over themselves saying wonderful things about George. After he finishes, he goes back inside his house, goes up onto the second floor. They've got this little deck up there, and that's where he kept his pet white mice. And so he would sit up there and he was playing with his mice, and a reporter was standing under the deck and overheard George. And he heard George talking to the mice saying, I'm so sorry that I had to leave you, but it couldn't be helped.
Wow.
That's the kind of stuff I kept stumbling across on a daily basis. It was just like, so many good things to the story.
Oh, awesome. Now, the question is, did the reporter make that up, right? I mean, I'm sure they were all stumbling over themselves to get little bits and pieces, back in the day.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know who to believe, because I read the FBI report, and the FBI says that the reporter was at the police station, blah, blah, blah. And the reporter was like, that is a bunch of crap. That's not what happened. I was at the Weyerhaeuser house, and I got a call from my publisher. Man. I don't know who to believe.
Awesome. Great job. Great job.
Thanks.